Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Okay, well, welcome to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We are very happy to keep doing these conversations for you. I find them very interesting and fun. So today is Earth Day. We're recording this on April 22nd, 2022. So if you're out there in the future, you're probably hearing it a few days later. But yeah, so Earth Day is today. There's lots of ways that you can get involved with Earth Day, Earth Week, and even there are some groups that call it Earth Month, which I think is great. I know there are lots of people picking up trash on the beaches, lots of people making donations to their favorite environmental charity, lots of people making changes to the way they eat and the way they live, and maybe making some new resolutions about consuming less or driving less, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of ways to get involved, and I think every day should be Earth Day, because every day is an opportunity for all of us to treat our planet in a way that secures our future and doesn't imperil future generations. So along those lines, obviously there's lots that can be done in the technical world, a lot that can be done with technology, a lot that can be done with design and software, the energy sector, and within the blockchain space, of course, which we're all familiar with, that can address some of these problems. And so today we're going to have Steve Ross Talbot, who is a staff member at RChain, and he is going to talk a bit about RPC. And Steve, by request, I would love to hear you first introduce yourself in terms of your background in your work, and perhaps how you arrived at RChain in the first place. Maybe we could start there.
Okay, yeah. So, in, like all good stories, and Star Wars in particular, a long, long time ago, in what seems now an alternate reality, growing up shaped you. That's one thing that I'll say. Growing up shaped you. And I grew up in the UK, the son of a South African Cape Cod mother and an English-Irish father. And I grew up in an area in the UK called Dover, a frontier town, because that's where the Channel Ferry goes. And I was one of only 3 non-white kids in my secondary school, my grammar school. So it's quite a difference. And as you're going through that period of your life, those teen years, you start to become the character that you are. And I suffered racism like the other 3. But I got good at one thing, really, 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 really good at one thing. And so I stopped being characterized by my color and started to be characterized by what I did. And what I did was run. I could really, 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 really run, and quite quickly. So I gobbled up records, gobbled up cups, gobbled up rankings, and got quite well known. And the racism kind of, by and large, stopped, but it's not something that you forget. And although it sort of stopped, it didn't actually really stop. There was a side to the way I was characterized. So as a runner, somebody liked to characterize me as a black stallion, which is quite a, ultimately it's quite a racist thing, right? But it wasn't sort of like using other derogatory terms. It was always, there was a sort of positive angle to it, which is about the sport, to try and get over the fact that really you were being, differentiated in some way that you did not have control over. So all that time ago started, I then ended up going to university, to Leeds, where I did computer science, or computational studies it was called. It was one of only 6 universities in the country at the time that did computer science in any degree format. And so I ended up at Leeds, not even my first choice, and got really involved in doing what I could do second best, which turned out to be program. I could really program, and I could really program really quite quickly. And in the first term at the university, I wrote a multi-author, a multiplayer game on a PDP-11 using C and Unix, and that's quite unusual for somebody of my age. So I got really good at that, and then that led to obviously a career in computer science, and I started looking at databases quite a lot, oddly enough, and it was around about the birth of the 16-bit microprocessor, which kind of changed everything. It was the portent of the laptop and the desktop computer. So I wrote a whole bunch of things during my career, but I ended up starting a company called Spiritsoft in 1997. And they were the first JMS, first complex event processing, and first enterprise service bus company in the world. And I was found myself the founder of this thing. I'm the one that went to register the papers. I owned most of all the shares. I gave some away to some of the co-founders on a promise, oddly enough, and this is really relevant to RChain today, on a promise of equalizing the shares before we got investment. Right, so that was my promise to them. Never written down, just made, but made in good faith. And as we got quite successful before we got investment, a couple of the guys got antsy about the fact that I hadn't equalized it, but we hadn't even had a meeting with the investor at that point. And there was the usual backbiting that happens, unfortunately, in these situations. And I decided ahead of time that I would indeed equalize the shares. So I did. True to my word. I would never have done anything else. And I think that shows that fairness is quite an important part in how I operate. And it's not just fairness because I think it is. The other people have to think it's fair too. So that there's a natural consensus. So in 2004, I joined W3C. And when you join W3C, as Greg knows, you're invited by Tim Berners Lee to chair something. That's how you become a chair. And there was this new group that was being talked about called the Choreography Working Group. And it was at a time when there was a kind of whilst there was Kofi Annan and the UN and George W. Bush, at the same time, there was Lou Gerstner and Bill Gates and who were often referred to as IBsoft. And then there was the rest, which was basically Oracle, Sun, and the rest. And there were these two camps very much at play in the standards world. And W3C was trying to be the UN, and Choreography Working Group was established. And for whatever reason, Bill Gates and Lou Gerstner decided that they weren't going to participate in that standards group. And I thought, well, that's a shame. I knew that they had some other plan to do a different standards group and to go to another standards group called Oasis, who don't operate the same way as W3C do. W3C operate with a much more of a collaborative consensus building approach. So it kind of worked well for me in that environment. And that first meeting that I remember going to, where we were all face to face at Oracle's headquarters in, I think, Redmond, something like that, in California. I had been liaising with the Pi Calculus community because I was pretty sure that it could have a role to play. Through a friend, somebody who become quite a good friend, Alexis Richardson, I met Koei Honda and Nobuko Yoshida. I already knew Robin Milner and many of the others. And I didn't at that time know Greg Meredith. But then I kind of got introduced to Greg Meredith. And it became obvious that, it'd be great if Greg could come down. So I asked him, I said, I can't come down. The band, not allowed to. Politics won't let me. Fortunately, I believe the head of standards for Microsoft stupidly went away at the time of the meeting. And whilst that person's back was turned, a certain Greg Meredith and Alan Brown turned up at the meeting, which was, you got to imagine this, nobody expected anyone from Microsoft or IBM to turn up at that meeting. And there was some press there. And then these two walked in. It was just a sensational piece of journalism. And Greg went to the board, like Greg does, and he said, look, if you do an execution language, you'll be killed in the crush, right? But if you do a description language from which execution may be derived and proven, then you'll be onto something that's really useful that can coexist. And to do that, these are the things you should look at. And one of them was Pi Calculus. Right, and we'd been having a discussion up to that point about what formalism should we use, and several of us had wanted to go the Pi Calculus route, including Nick Kavansis at Oracle, who headed up a lot of this. And so that was great with Greg saying that and Alan saying that, because it just endorsed everything we've been saying. Greg and Alan went off, having delivered their message. There was all sorts of press, although Microsoft then decided not to engage in the choreography working group, the damage, I shall call it, it's the best damage you can possibly have damage, was done. And the direction was set. And from that, Robin Milner himself joined the one and only standards group he ever participated in, which was the choreography working group. So that's kind of W3C, which I did whilst I was holding down a proper job at the same time. And then I ended up through various companies at Thoughtworks. And Thoughtworks I joined because I was tired of the old ways of working, the politics in companies, the barriers that are erected, and the sheer waste of energy in corporate life, really. I'd done quite a stint at that stage, about 8 or 9 years, not being in a startup. And startups are political too. But Thoughtworks had a promise because of Roy Singham, who was the founder. And Roy was a former Black Panther member. So that held a lot of sway for me. That was largely the reason I joined Thoughtworks to begin with. I liked the idea. I kind of liked some of the stuff they were doing with respect to microservices, James Lewis and others. Enjoyed the interaction with James. And so joined Thoughtworks, who operate kind of like a collective. So it's a totally different operating model, much similar to W3C. There are certainly cabals in the Thoughtworks model, not supposed to be, but everything is all set up really for a sort of agile business flow that includes all the retrospectives you need to look back and try to be dispassionate, but without losing your passion, if you know what I mean. So that you can learn. It was brilliant for that. And kind of then shortly after that, I left Thoughtworks, joined another company, and ended up in short order doing 2 other things. And I'll pause. So the first thing that I did was I joined RChain, the co-op, because Nobuko Yoshida had rung me up and said, I've heard on the grapevine, Steve, Greg Meredith is doing something with blockchain that could be interesting. And I thought I should tell you. So I thought, well, I better ring Greg up then. So I rang Greg up. He said, yeah, Steve, why don't you join? We're just about to set RChain Europe up. You could be part of that. So I got involved. And that was, and the remit RChain Europe was given, alas, it didn't last the pace, but the reasoning behind its existence was actually very clever. as ever, Greg clever. And it was given the task of looking at digital democracy. How do we do this digital democracy stuff? It didn't really have the resources and the money to do that, but it did examine the topic at quite depth, not without actually coming up with any tools, but it did examine the topic in a lot of depth. And out of that collaboration at RChain Europe came the intro to Richard Barbrook. Well, for the co-op, I knew Richard before because of Thoughtworks, digital democracy. So when digital democracy becomes the topic for RChain Europe, I'm all over it like a rash. This is kind of like manna sent from heaven for me. This is what I believe in. And in short order, I went to Findhorn and spent a week there, and that was quite life-changing because it showed me that people can collaborate, even when you have a consensus model only, and on a personal level with people, it's about what you can live with. And that's a great phrase. When you can't live with a particular decision a majority take, all you can do is move on, right? But if you can live with it, okay, that's what compromise is. And it really taught me how compromise has helped shape Findhorn to this day. And I think, going from there to what we're doing in RChain Publishing and in RChain becomes the sort of next chapter. I'll stop there.
Yeah, fantastic. A lot of that stuff I had not heard before. It was wonderful to hear how you met up with Greg and your path sort of to coming to RChain. So maybe you could say a bit about how the idea for RPC started. I don't know if it was originally your idea, or, I mean, you kind of alluded that you've been thinking about these things.
Well, all ideas are a network, right? I really believe it. It's rare, very rare, that an idea is just somebody's sole thing, right? There were antecedents to it usually. And then there's some discussion, and then it bubbles up, and for those that are involved in the bubbling up, they look back at it and think, yeah, but that was really obvious, So where does RChain Publishing come from? Well, its antecedents, I suppose, are COVID, right? So COVID pops up, and I'm looking at, there's got to be an opportunity here. So I think I say to the board, I'm going to have a crack at this, see what I can do, and I start getting involved, and I look to do a little demo. So I first of all do this sort of animated version of the COVID passport and release that to the community and say, look, this is what I want to build. And then these two guys come and knock on my Discord door, right? Raphael and Theo. And they say, well, we've kind of got something that might kind of do that. We can change it a little bit. And I said, well, let's have a demo. So they showed me a demo, and the demo was something called RFM, RChain File Manager. Right, this is the beginning of RDrive, really, but also equally the beginning of RChain Publishing. RChain Publishing comes almost after that, really. So, that little demo persuaded me, well, hang on, that means we can store a PDF, which is my vaccination record, on file, and then we can get it signed. So we then got Greg involved, and then the 3 signature model for attestation was born. Right, so Greg provided the 3 with Raphael largely in sort of discussion one day. We were talking about it on a Zoom call, and attestation, we can do that by doing these 3 signatures. So we got the interchange correct so that we could then demonstrate RFM, a souped up RFM, which was the first implementation of the animated video I did before, which showed the uploading of a PDF document that was your vaccine certificate or whatever it may be, with all 3 signatures, meaning that you can't do anything fraudulent with it. And that was done really super quick. I mean, it's within a 6-day period, but it didn't take 6 days. It took much less than 6 days. I think the discussion that we had probably was over the course of, in total, the various discussions that had gone on up to that point. It's probably about a week's worth of discussion, say, over a month or slightly more. And then we get the video out. Then we get the elicitation of Theo and Raphael and the demo 6 days after that first showing. And that was just unbelievable. And we tried really hard to take this demo around and add things to it. We made it even better to try and get people interested. But it was really hard to get anyone to hear you, because all the contracts were being carved up in the UK by friends of the Conservative Party. And if you weren't on the inside, you weren't on the inside. And in the EU, there was a lot of red tape, but it's really hard to get in there because we didn't have a European organisation, and the UK is Brexiting. So we tried to see if Singapore would do it with Dr. Richard Coker. And this is one of those collaborations that involved Frank Arnold in those days, which alas didn't turn out so well for me anyway, personally. But that was a fabulous collaboration with some people that led to the development of that COVID passport and an attempt to get people to buy into it. And then when they didn't, the idea, don't forget, we all knew we could store music on chain and stream it. So it's not like we didn't know this was a possibility. We just didn't have, I think, the lingua franca to describe it, or to just understand quite conceptually what we really had, right? On RChain. This isn't about RChain Publishing, this is just RChain. So from there, the idea of storing photographs was born, because the COVID passport stuff just wasn't going anywhere. And all of us were really convinced that there was something in this on-chain storage and attestation. It just seems like a natural thing, because attestation gives you some confidence in truth. You've got a blockchain with perfect provenance of digital assets. What's not to like? There's got to be something there. So we carried on, and out of that, the first sort of on-chain storage of something that isn't a PDF was born. So a photograph or piece of music. So I did Thomas Edison, Mary Has a Little Lamb. So I did a little MP3 and I uploaded it to RFM, right? So out of that was then born a team. So a team's put together to deliver something concrete in that sort of space. So real money now starts to get expended. Now, along the way, I should mention, I did a 3-week stint with a different company called Ident3, who were doing identity on blockchain and using Hermes blockchain, which is a ZK roll-up to Ethereum, right? So I needed money, so I needed to work, and I wasn't really working at that time. So I needed something to sustain me. So I took this job with them. I really liked them. I thought they were brilliant. I thought that they had a similar ethos to RChain. But at the time, I wasn't really thinking about working for RChain in any fundamental way other than being on the board. And so when that took me away, I told Greg that I was doing this. And then Greg said, well, wouldn't it be better if you were actually working for RChain? Then you could just do that there. You could just self-sovereign data, Steve. You could do self-sovereign data at RChain, right? We'll do a small statement of work for you. And so he did, and so I left. So I did 3 weeks, and then I had the terrible time of having to talk to them and say, look, I'm really sorry. This isn't for me. And it is, and the reason it wasn't for me, which is a really important message, wasn't to do with the people. It wasn't to do with the intricacies of the technology and the design decisions they've made. It was the fact that the very base decision that they've made about the architecture of their blockchain was wrong. And I couldn't get over that. I just couldn't get over that. And there was no way of getting them easily to switch. They were on a journey, and it's a journey where they have to make their own mistakes. But it just seemed obvious to me that all the things Ident3 were doing should just sit on RChain, really. Now, they weren't doing on-chain storage in the way that I've been talking about it. They weren't doing it because they couldn't do it. So when Greg cut the contract, it was a no-brainer. So I came back over to RChain. Well, I started working more fully with RChain. And out of that, RPC was born. So we knew we wanted to set up a new entity. We knew it would mirror what had been done with Dazzle to make it an investment vehicle, because there's no point spending all this money if you're not going to get some return on it for RChain and RChain members who need the chain itself to grow. So of late, I suppose, it's been fashioned into something called RPC, RChain Publishing Cooperative. It's trying out the notion of being a limited cooperative association under Seattle law. So it's trying out a new form of off-chain governance, which is quite an attractive, I'm finding quite an attractive message, because from an investor perspective, because this, as Greg described, there's 3 houses that you vote in. So one house is sort of the house of investment, you can consider it. The other is the house of patron members, and I think the other one's possibly the employees or something like that. But there's 3. Greg will butt in. Tell me what's the third?
It's just 2 houses.
Oh, it's just the 2 houses. Okay, then there's 2 houses. Oh, just the third house is really just the management, but they don't get a vote. So yeah, so the 2 houses. And what's really brilliant about it is that they balance each other. And the patron members is a really great concept if you want to change how people feel about the technology they use. Suddenly they get a sense of ownership, a sense of contribution by being patron members and having a say. I mean, a real say, a vote. And given that RChain already has got the digital democracy bits, right? So our votes, our chats, I mean, they're not all completely finished, but they are functioning, and our vote certainly is. So the very important one's there. So it just seemed to me that that's a way to have a really good stickiness of your user base, is to have them own what you're doing and be involved in it. So it's a natural extension of, with respect to the self-sovereignty of your data and how you manage it as a facility, but also being governed, the whole thing being governed in the same way that I'd witnessed with my poor attempts at Spiritsoft to equalize the shares, all the collaboration techniques I learned at W3C, the notion of both the importance of the individual and the collective at Thoughtworks, everything that I'd learned from RChain, the co-op, and the digital democracy experience, and everything that I'd learned obviously at Fintorn as well. So all of those things come into force as we set up RChain Publishing. It's not just setting up a company, it's much more than that, right? Because everyone that becomes part of it has to understand what that operating model is and why it's that way, and buy into it. So that's kind of how that got set up. And in setting it up, 2 things were born out of the demos. So we knew we needed a marketplace, and we'd extended RFM to include some notion of a marketplace. And then we'd rewritten a whole bunch of stuff, and Raphael had done stuff with the RChain token stuff. And now we've taken that on board and are extending that as well. So we were able to put together a marketplace with an attestation model, really fundamental. Those 2 things absolutely rock. And they are core to everything that we do in RChain Publishing, not just for NFTs. It's a marketplace for anything. It doesn't just have to be NFTs. It's just a new kind of marketplace that can be white labeled as well. And then sort of as an addendum, because I asked specifically the guys to look at this, I said, guys, I really want to see if we've got a great naming scheme in RChain. At least we have one. No other blockchain has one, but we've got a naming scheme. File systems have a naming scheme. There's got to be a way you can mount that thing as an NFS drive, surely. So Theo takes it upon himself with Bill, whilst David's looking at the marketplace, to see if they can do it. And they start making little tiny steps, and then they have some great steps. And now they've got like a normal file browser, a bog standard normal file browser that can sit on top, and you can see RChain, your RChain space. It's like you having your own RChain vault of data that's extensible. and you can mount it and you can play with it and you can just do all sorts of cool things. And, that comes as a result of great collaboration within the team, not just within the team, but wider. I mean, there are other people that have commented, contributed in some way, Raphael being one of them, but, Tomislav and some of the other guys on the dev team have, they've been sort of engaging in discussions about this as well. So it kind of helps us know that we're on a really good wicket, as they say in England.
Fantastic. And I love that you talk about RPC sort of being the culmination of all of these different paths you've taken in your life, all these different places that you've been mentally, spiritually, physically. So maybe since we've heard quite a lot about the background of RPC, maybe we can talk for people who are interested, maybe a little bit about some technical aspects of it. Maybe I can open it up to the others if they have.
Well, so I'll say one thing before, because it's Earth Day. So on our website, right, r-pub.com, right, that's the RChain Publishing website. On our website, it's very deliberate, and we mean every single word, and we will put proofs up on that website over time. We're claiming to be the greenest NFT platform, right? And that's because we're on the greenest blockchain on the planet. And that is on the website, front and center, right? We're not interested in doing an NFT platform unless it can be the greenest. And that becomes really fundamental to the wider aspirations of, confronting climate change and protecting this Earth on Earth Day. That's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, that's amazing and such a good point. I feel really fortunate that this team understands the facts of climate and cares about the facts of climate, because there are, as we know, lots of projects that will greenwash all day and net zero 2050 this and that, and it can be really demoralizing. The younger you are, the more demoralizing it is. But I really appreciate that we're able to keep having these conversations and to really take on the facts of what's going on. I think that's one reason we even have these calls, is to bear witness to what's going on and to acknowledge that it's real and that we care. So Steve, Henley, Daryl, Greg, do any of you have anything you'd like to ask about RPC or anything else?
Well, I think one aspect that many people would be interested in is search and searchability. One of the great aspects of Web 2.0 is, being able to put in a search criteria in a window and find what you're looking for. So when I think of RPC and, artists, and one of the things that they'll want is, for their art to be found in RPC and the broader RPC ecosystem. So perhaps, Steve, you could talk about the search and searchability and the importance of that and how RPC is going to be tackling that.
Yeah, and also as you answer that, that's also connected to the slogan, isn't it?
Yes, publish once, be discovered everywhere.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, you can't. So I'm sure Greg will chime in. So in part because all other blockchains have this sort of really crazy addressing mechanism where they don't really have any structured way of talking about any of their resources, right? So it's really hard to find them. And consequently, it's also very difficult to search. And RChain does have that inbuilt, but it was done deliberately. It'd be nice to say that. Greg will explain the rationale, but I've heard the story about the rationale. It wasn't a happenstance moment, having the notion of a URI inside the blockchain itself, and that is part and parcel of having search, right? So the two go together. Imagine the web in its initial formation without the URIs. How would you have done search, right? You wouldn't have found anything. So the search would start off searching everything linearly, and you'd never get to, as the blockchain grows, you'd never get to the end. You'd never get anything. It would be impossible. So you have to, these two things go together. It's just not, in fact, the way that Greg sometimes explains it, it's kind of like, it's almost like you want to slap your head. The early days of blockchain, why did you do that? Right? It's such a basic mistake. And if blockchain is going to be something of significance over and above just, a demonstration that we don't necessarily need the Federal Reserve to issue a currency, it's going to have more significance. The naming scheme and the ability to search are absolutely front and center. So, the way that Greg talks about it is, the web, the desire to search the web in some way was a mirror of the desire to connect different intranets together. So the power of searching, the search capability is not just the search capability on RChain mainnet as it is today. The search capability is beyond that. It's every shard that is connected. And in the same way that we can search the web, we will be able to search the blockchain as it grows. It's not like we wake up one morning and we search, and the search takes particularly a long time, and you think, oh, that's another 7,000 nodes that have just added themselves to the network. You don't do that. You just expect it just to work. And you expect it to incorporate the new data as it goes as much as possible. And you can't do that without a good search mechanism. So to do a marketplace and to do it properly, having that search capability on chain, as opposed to having to maintain indices off chain of what is on chain, becomes essential. It's an essential differentiator. And it's one of the ways I think that RPC's offerings can grow massively. Imagine not just being able to search your own RDrive, imagine being given permission to mount somebody else's RDrive and being able to search that. If you did that as in a standard file system, you'd expect to be able to do that. If you're given the permission to mount, there are things you should be able to search for within that drive. Might not be everything, but you'll be permissioned in some suitable way. So search is critical. I mean, you might think of it as, see, the data is just quite boring. Knowledge, that's much more important. But when you have data that's static, right? After time, that's just data. That's not knowledge. What becomes interesting is how you connect it. And you connect it through search. Now you have knowledge, right? Except that you don't have knowledge in RChain. What you have is self-sovereign knowledge in the same way you have self-sovereign data. And there's a degree of trust in that. If you've got attested pieces of data through that, you might actually specifically say in the search that I want the attestation level to be whatever it may be, to get some sense of the strength of the result of the query to you, because that represents knowledge, and knowing the strength of it is a fundamental asset of how you acquire knowledge. And that knowledge is fundamental to how we might fight climate change. There's been many instances, obviously, where data has been put out there that is bogus. Well, we can perhaps start to mediate the prospect of that with attestations and searches on a blockchain on a global scale. So search is fundamental.
Yeah, and I like that one use case that you mentioned, Steve, as far as being able to share someone's RDrive. So say you have an RDrive and I have an RDrive, and it's storing our files on the blockchain, but you could have the ability to grant me access to your RDrive, and now I can search your data. I have access to your data and I can search it. So, just the thinking about the possibilities around that is, I think, is really neat.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that you grade the data that you hold on your RDrive, right? Say from 1 to 10. You may not have it all nicely dispersed through 1 to 10, where 10 is the most important, most sensitive, most private data. So then you might say to somebody that approaches you, they might say to you, look, hey, look, I'd really like to see some of your data. I know you do this, Mr. Henley. I'd like to see that. So you might say, well, I've got some on chain, and that's level whatever it is. So your grant to that person might be that it's within a particular, tagged as a particular domain, and has a certain level of privacy, right? And in return, they have to pay you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you could say, well, oh, you're a charity. I'll give it to you for free. Mm-hmm. So you give it for free. Or it's a pharmaceutical company, in which case you say, well, 10 riv. And you can have it, and you can only have it for 6 months. So you might have a smart contract that does that, right?
Right. Good point. Mm-hmm. Neat.
It's self-sovereign. You've got to decide, and that's the key. And it's easy, ubiquitous. And it was one of the goals. Make it ubiquitous. Make blockchain relevant to granny. Still remember those words ringing in my ears from Greg.
Yep. Well, that was all the questions I had. Does anyone else have any?
Do others have anything they would like to ask? Steve, we have about 15 minutes left, and I've already learned a ton, obviously. I learn a lot every time I hear you speak, Steve. Both of you Steves, actually.
I learn a lot when I either hear you play a violin or I find somebody else that plays a violin that you know.
Well, Einstein played violin, so it is something that smart people like to do.
You must be way smarter than me.
No, I'm just kidding. But thank you for saying that. But I'm not kidding about Einstein, though. He really did play the violin.
Yeah.
And quite well, I actually.
Robin Milner played cello.
Oh,
he was a concert grade cellist. He was very good.
Wow.
I thought it was clarinet.
Maybe I have to check. I thought it was a string instrument person, unless it was Lucy that played the cello.
I think it was Lucy that played the cello. I think Robin played the clarinet. Let me just double check that.
Well, we can all agree that music definitely engages our brains and also whenever I have a problem to solve, if I play music, usually it gets solved a bit quicker.
Interestingly, from a Robin Milner perspective, where I live now in Cornwall, it's only about 40 minutes drive to where Robin was born. He was born in Cornwall.
Oh, wow.
Or Devon, depending on whether you're Devonian or Cornish, because he's right on the river where the border is.
I'd have to find his obit. It doesn't say on the Wikipedia page, or at least I don't see it.
He played an instrument anyway, and it wasn't the triangle.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that people are just beginning to understand is how much RChain has been organized around data, right? So our RPC is an excellent example that we're seeing, and where they're beginning to make the on-chain storage and data manipulation available using metaphors that are already ubiquitous, such as the file browser metaphor and things like that, and the search that rholang natively offers is a part of that, and it's very much by design. But also, I think what people have not yet understood about RChain is that it's part of a progression. So the search capabilities that we provide today are about not just keeping up with what we had from the web, but going beyond that to providing, much more interesting search. And we've talked on this program about sort of the whole DJ example, which I like to give. But out past that, the OSLF algorithm, which we could sell entirely on the basis of the protection, the security guarantees that it gives to smart contracts. We could sell it entirely on that basis, or we could sell it on the basis of being able to provide that sort of protections for other languages as well, from JavaScript to OCaml. It can provide that sort of support there. But I think we also have to understand that once you have these sophisticated type mechanisms, they become search mechanisms for a wide variety of knowledge bases that we don't currently manage as if they were databases. So GitHub, I think we have to regard as a knowledge base rather than a database, because we don't have the same kinds of search mechanisms as we have for relational data, as an example. So with relational data, we can put large volumes of data in, and we can slice and dice and pivot and get a variety of perspectives on the data. So we can find certain kinds of needles in that haystack. But that's just not the case for GitHub. So most of how people navigate GitHub is through social mechanisms or metadata. But with the OSLF, what we'll be able to do is to search knowledge bases like that and other kinds of knowledge bases. So we'll be able to upgrade rholang and its search capabilities to include more and richer data sources. And this has all been by design, like from once, it wasn't a secret back at the beginning of the World Wide Web that the aim was a semantic web, but the tools that were provided for realizing the semantic web were far short of the mark. Basically, they were short of the goal. Whereas with the rholang design, we can go towards structured data in a way that integrates the best of SQL and NoSQL. And then with OSLF, we can go towards real semantic understanding. So a real semantic web. And that has been the goal, since before people were explicitly using the term semantic web. And it's just required a lot of time and energy to build it out. And lots of innovation along the way. So that's and RPC is poised to provide that watershed, that kind of pivotal moment. There's, if we're going to use musical metaphors, there's your life before you hear Charlie Parker, your musical understanding before you hear Charlie Parker, and then there's your musical understanding after you've heard Charlie Parker. So it's kind of like that. So RPC is like, blockchain. There's blockchain before RPC, and then there's blockchain after RPC. And so that's kind of one way to think about it. And then the same will happen again once people begin to see and internalize what the OSLF algorithm really enables us to accomplish. I did want to mention one other thing, which is that because of RPC's position and our overall goals, I think we should begin to kind of openly speak about how RChain and RDrive and tools like that put us in a position to provide an alternative to IPFS.
Oh, I can't believe. Yeah, you know, I picked this up, Greg, and I was talking on the showcase earlier today, because I picked up what you'd said earlier today. And I said to the guys, wouldn't it just be brilliant if, you know, RDrive could be stood up on, you know, on mainnet, right? And then offered as exactly that. So you can upload something, and then you just give that to the developer of the website that's doing the OpenSea NFTs. Right, there you go. Now you can store stuff on chain.
Yes, exactly.
And there's URIs already attached to the files, so because of the naming scheme, so it's kind of it ends up being quite a trivial thing to do. But yeah, totally. I mean, RDrive has to be RDrive's life is outside and beyond the confines of just RPC. It's on every shard we find.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But what that means then is that we can approach lots of different chains and say, we think that you would like an on-chain data solution to kind of sit underneath your chain. Yeah. And so you know, IBM, for example, comes to mind. So they have a chain, and they struggle with scaling, and so at least initially for the data side of that, we can offer them RChain and RDrive as tools that they can use to enhance or extend or expand the capabilities of Fabric. And, you know, we could do the same thing for Tezos. We could say, you know, you can still have your Tezos customers, and then Tezos just kind of turns around and subcontracts to RChain and RDrive for data transactions. And we could do the same for Ethereum. And so in this way, RChain's superior data capabilities can cooperate and collaborate with these other chains, so that they can offer these capabilities to their customer base. And I think that's important, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's not really so much about competition as it is about cooperation.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add in before we go?
Yeah, one little thing. Again, Tim with Earth Week.
Yes, please.
Earth Day. So one of the, you know, I was speaking to these guys at Ecole calendar with Greg after Greg had done his presentation. Right, and towards the end of what Greg was talking about, I chimed in, and I explained to them that the RDrive, as an example, is extensible. The aim is to make it extensible, so you can do other kinds of digital assets that store on it. And I explained why that's really important, because really what we want to do in RPC, why we're all there, why I'm there, right? My pet project, the one I want to see done, isn't the one I'm working on right now. This is a means to an end. It's the UN refugee passport. That's what I want to get. I want to build that. I don't want to build it. I want it built. I don't care who does it. And it turns out, of course, RChain's a really good place to do it, and with an RDrive, right? So RDrive, RChain, brilliant place to actually build one of those. And I left that out as a challenge to the students that were at Ecole calendar. And I did get feedback from some of them in that meeting, because several of them came up to me afterwards, and they actually said they'd really like to do that. So I have contacted them all, and if people start doing that, then they can use the API for RDrive and build a new file type that we could then get endorsed by the UN as a valid refugee passport. And that, in the context of Earth Day and climate change, just seemed to me to be a laudable way of explaining why I'm really doing RChain Publishing, and all these other things are a means to an end.
Yeah, And how great it was that you reminded us all that it's so important to not recognize ourselves in the work, but the work in ourselves.
What a lovely phrase.
Thank you. I'm not sure where it came from. I don't think it's mine, like most of the things I say. So thank you all. This was great, Steve. Great to get to know you a bit better. Great to hear a bit more about your past. And we're all very excited for RPC, I think. We can all say that for sure. I'm so excited to see what's going to happen next. And next week, we also are going to have a very special guest with us. So that will be quite exciting. Thank you all for a wonderful conversation. Make sure you're subscribed to RChain on YouTube, following RChain on Twitter, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I just hope that my future becomes far more interesting than my past. Here's to
Be
that.
careful. Be careful what you wish for.
I wish. Take care.